Okay. Thank you all for joining us for the Proposal Development Workshop number 3. This is the third in a series of an annual experience moving along the trajectory of submitting a proposal. This actual event is all about revealing some of the hidden and implicit knowledge around research. And so we're very fortunate to have 3 panelists here today to talk to us a little bit about that. Leaders from across the university and very generous with their time. So what we'll do is we'll allocate approximately 10 minutes per leader and then have them introduce themselves and then talk a little bit about their topic of interest. And then at the end, we'll sum that up and be able to take questions. We are recording this. We do want to acknowledge the fact that it is recorded, and thus we'll stop at the end for private discussion. But in the meantime, I will pass it along to Dr. Fonseca Chavez. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Faye, and thank you for the invitation to join this conversation. National First Gen Week is coming up in November, and we just finished having our college First Gen dinner for our students. So I'm very much thinking about what do we need as First Gen students and scholars and researchers at all different levels. So I'm Vanessa Fonseca Chavez, and I am an Associate Dean of Inclusion and Student Success for the College of Integrative Sciences and Arts, and I'm also an Associate Professor of English. I finished my PhD at ASU in 2013, and then my first academic position was at the University of Wyoming as an assistant professor of Latino Studies and English. And I came back to ASU in 2016. So I've been here, this is my 8th year back at ASU. So just to give you a sense of kind of my grant funding activity, I have applied for everything from a college level summer funding opportunity to NEH grants. So everything from publication and programming grants to institutional, state, and national level grants, receiving approximately $80,000 of funding, which is huge for humanities researchers. So I've often heard that in the sciences, researchers won't even blink an eye at an $80,000 opportunity, which is very different depending on what your background and kind of your grants needs are. So as I was preparing my remarks for this session, I actually received a call from a former grad student who's now an assistant professor at an R2 institution. And she says, what are you up to? And I said, I'm applying, I'm working on this grant as first gen researcher presentation. And she said, perfect, I have a question about grants. So she's brand new and she is just applying for this granting opportunity that came across her email from her school. But one of the things that immediately stood out to me is that this particular person, who is also a first gen, the 2 things that they wanted most was money to adjust to a new cost of living in a new state and in this new professor role, and then 2, a way to support students. And so as we kind of looked at that grant opportunity, we tried to dissect the different aspects of that call to make sure that they understood what the grant would fund, and then how to also align that language with the kind of work that they envision doing. And unfortunately, we had to have conversations about, this is not what this grant is funding according to the description. This is not what you can ask for. But I felt confident in doing that after now having spent 10 years trying to figure out what the heck to do when you're applying for grants. So it was really nice to have that moment to be able to talk to, my former grad student about their first gen experience at a new institution. So we know that many first gen researchers, and in some cases faculty of color who may or may not come from low income backgrounds, and who may also be navigating other intersections of their identity, will always find themselves advocating for community, whether that be in their teaching, their service, or their research. And so that's something that I'm always doing when I'm pursuing grant opportunity. I want to bring in the largest swath of the community possible so that we all can benefit from different levels of funding available to us. And to me, that really feels like a first gen researcher mentality. We remember the communities that got us here, and so we want to think about those communities moving forward. And so some of the questions that were posed by Faye are, what are we thinking about at different points in our academic career as first gen researchers at 1 month, 6 months, 1 year post-hire? And this is specifically coming from a humanities perspective. And I think Libby and Vernon will offer different perspectives on granting from their respective fields. But at 1 month in the humanities, there's not much we're advising for first-gen researchers. What we would like first-gen researchers to do is to understand the landscape of the institution. And part of that is understanding what kind of institution we are at. So because, for first gen, and again, for low income, faculty of color, we're looking for some place that will offer us a job and some kind of financial stability, right? And so we don't always get to choose whether or not we're at a small liberal arts college, a community college, an R2 or an R1. So once we figure out what kind of institution we're at, then we can kind of discern what kind of opportunities and expectations are placed upon us at that institution. I would say at 6 months to a year, you should ask yourself, do I even need a grant for tenure and promotion? Because I spent 3 years at the University of Wyoming, I cannot even say right now as a first-gen researcher what my tenure and promotion expectations were. I don't know that no one ever sat down with me to look at the policies and procedures manual to lay out what the expectation was. And at that institution, I applied for and received up to $50,000 of grants, including an NEH, a now embarrassing NEH application that I submitted in my second year on the tenure track. And part of that is I didn't know the rules. It all felt like a blur. My other two, the PI and the other co-PI, felt like they knew exactly what they were doing. So I just felt like I was along for the ride without actually being able to understand what it was that we were doing. And that application would look very different today. So in our policies and procedures for our college, it does say, because we're an arts and sciences college, it does say that the candidate will have actively engaged in seeking external support from major organizations and agencies, but it also says the successful candidate will meet or exceed expectations for their specific area of research or creative activity. It does not say specifically what humanities scholars need, and it does not say what science scholars need or math scholars or social science scholars. So one thing I would advise, of course, at that 6 months to a year is have conversations with your associate dean of faculty affairs, have conversations with your chair or area leads to understand what that means according to your discipline. It's not common in the humanities to be required to pursue grant funding. But the struggle, and for first gen researchers, is that there's so many good opportunities out there, and we're seeing people being successful with this funding opportunity. So we also want to participate because we think that's what we're supposed to be doing. But we're also simultaneously managing a heavy workload. We know that faculty of color perform more service for our students of color than other groups. And we often, again, because we have that kind of community-oriented mentality, we are spending a lot of time doing that and not really understanding kind of the expectations of our institution. And some people who may benefit from that kind of implicit knowledge, we find ourselves not benefiting from that same fund of knowledge. We need to sponsor each other. This is one way where we can build social and political capital. And there's a prime difference between mentoring someone and sponsoring someone. We need mentors in our lives to help us, just as I did for my student, understand specifically what that grant is asking and be able to curate an application that has a higher level chance of success. But we also need sponsors. And that means we need people in the room uplifting our names and our work at the different tables that matter. And that's going to help bring us into the conversation. That's going to alleviate some of the so-called imposter syndrome that we often feel as first-gen researchers. And it's going to allow us to be ultimately more successful. The third question that Faye asked was, what are some ways to develop an individual and collaborative research agenda in advance of proposal writing? Again, I'm always thinking on collaborative terms. This work that I do cannot exist without community. And again, that's one of the struggles I often face in academia. I was told early on when I wanted to apply for grants, is this going to get you tenure and promotion? Is this a passion project? So folks are asking us these questions, and they're not passion projects. They're projects we feel deeply committed to, but we also have to align that with the expectations for tenure and promotion, of course. One example I can offer, just to kind of finish out my portion in terms of leveraging, is that I was the recipient of an ASU IHR Faculty Fellows Award a few years ago, Institute for Humanities Research. It's one of our major funding pots at ASU. It does a really great job of offering a large swath of grant opportunities, including talking to faculty about their interest in applying for NEH and having NEH folks come in and give pointers and tips on how to be successful. So I was a recipient of this award, but it was a seed grant. And the expectation of that is that you would apply for external funding and provide evidence of that. You didn't have to get external funding, but you did have to apply for it. So I was able to apply for a Whiting Foundation grant, and I was successful. And that's a $10,000 grant, which is big for people in the humanities. But the only way I was able to do this is because the IHR had an excellent staff member, shout out to Sarah Moser, who was able to help me understand how to put together budgets for grants that are funded through research development. And that was the first time I had engaged in that process. And then I also had a colleague who sent me the grant opportunity. And in that email, she said, I really encourage you to apply for this. She had listened attentively during that year when we were faculty fellows, and she affirmed that that was exactly the kind of grant that my research, that could support the kind of research I was doing. So without that kind of encouragement, mentorship, sponsorship, I don't know that I would have felt as confident going into that opportunity. So I'll stop there and pass it along to alphabetical order, Vernon Morris.
The V's are going first. I'm going to set my timer, so I'm just close to within the time here. But thanks and good morning to everyone. I'm Vernon Morris. I'm the Associate Dean for Knowledge Enterprise in New College. My background is geophysical sciences. So I'm on the sort of physical sciences end of the spectrum, where grant writing typically, especially in R1s, is part of the premium, part of the expectations that you will be evaluated on for promotion and tenure. I started, was sort of in a cohort with my siblings as a first generation in undergraduate, small undergraduate institution at HBCU. Actually backed into a PhD. Was again first generation experience as a PhD because I was following a mentor at that time. To be honest with you, I did not know what I was getting into, and ultimately went on to get do some postdocs and started off at an HBCU, Howard University. Was there for 23 years, and then came here during 2020, that normal year. And so over the course of that time, sort of patterned myself in the mold of grant writing. So written grants everywhere from workshop grants to career awards to center grants to near space projects on the International Space Station. So a spectrum of awards. And I think, like Vanessa alluded to, you learn. I think one of the pitfalls of being a first generation is you're really learning as you go in ways that people who know the system are picking opportunities a little more systematically. And I think that's important advice, is thinking about early about how you map your time onto projects, and this in the grant writing world, research types of projects, research types of endeavors, onto your roadmap to success in whatever position you're in. So if it's promotion and tenure, understanding what you need to get promotion and tenure and which grants are going to be the critical ones that will support that. And a lot of times, highly collaborative grants may be things that are interesting, but they don't map specifically. So developing that roadmap is really important. Getting advice on that roadmap is important. And I like the idea of take a settling time for the first 6 months or so to find out what the culture is, what are your expectations, who are people that would be good to collaborate with so that you get the credit if you're on a collaborative grant. If you're not listed as a PI or listed as an investigator, is that the best use of your time versus writing for a single investigator award? Is writing for fellowships or supporting undergraduate students for research, or a convening workshop more strategic than going for a career in the first year. These are things you want to think about before you jump in. And looking at what the hit rates. We were talking about hit rates when we first came into the room. What is the success rate in your unit for certain award types? And being strategic about how you select, okay, I'm going to go for this because, as it turns out, getting funding begets more funding in certain ways, especially at federal agencies like the NSF. So I wanted to address a little bit about social capital in that more specifically, and then hopefully we get a chance to have some Q&A and talk about some other things. I think in advancing social capital, one of the things that helped me a lot being in Washington, D.C. is that I could go to the federal agencies and sit down with program officers and have face-to-face conversations. Since the dinosaur age, we've advanced and you can Zoom and contact them in a lot more accessible ways. But I really encourage folks to start conversations with the federal agencies early and maintain those. Take advantage of, there's a number of opportunities that I didn't know about until much later that you can cultivate sponsors. And it's another thing that dovetails off what Vanessa said. The best avenues for funding is not just a great idea, because there's a lot of great ideas, and there's a lot of great ideas that never get funded. Best combination for success is that you have a great idea and a sponsor and a receptive audience for that idea, and you know where that receptive audience is. And you develop that by having an understanding of what you're trying to do and the impact, and having that impact sort of collaboratively shaped through conversations with people like program managers, with folks who might be in your unit or in different places in the university that understand framing of ideas. So this could be your research deans. These could be here at ASU, folks at Knowledge Enterprise. They could be, talk to your marketing folks, because some of the marketing people really have nice ideas of encapsulating ideas that you may take a long time to express. I meet with all the junior faculty in my school, so it spans from English to art to chemistry, and I say, what's your interest? What is your primary output? And what's the impact that you want to make? Can you tell me that in 2 minutes? And most people can't. And most people don't want to expand and do a number of things. But it's key to be able to say that in a concise way and put yourself in spaces where people are receptive to being sponsors. And a couple of these, I said, Gordon conferences, if you're in the sciences, physical sciences, and I think there's similar spaces in most disciplines. Gordon conferences, there's a Kavli Scholars Program, but these are programs to seek out and you talk to your advisors or mentors or deans, program leads, but seek out programs that are geared towards advancing the scholarship of junior scholars early, because in those fora, you develop a cohort of folks who are going through the same thing that you're going through, but they're specifically geared to elevate your ideas in ways that funding agencies are more receptive to them. And it's a route that I was not familiar with coming in. I recognize that it's available in in many different disciplines and across many different schools, but as a first generation, you might have to seek that out a little bit. But they're, sort of following the path of the meritocracy. Like, I just have a good idea, I'm good at it, and I'm going to submit it and I'll get funded. You actually need to do a few more things. And so the sponsors are really important. The audience in which you're expressing your ideas are important, and the framing of your ideas are important. And so getting help packaging those things before you start writing proposals is really important. And I think another thing is being realistic about time investments. This will be my final point if I'm working on time. I see a number of junior faculty saying, I'm going to write 3 proposals this year. I'm going to write 4 proposals this year. I'm going to shoot for all of these programs. And it's really okay, if not ideal, to have more time to invest in a project or idea development than you thought, than to realize you have less time and you're going to have to pull back from things. And so I strongly suggest, and there's some devices out there that are calculators for how much time it takes to write a paper or to write a proposal of a certain length and to prepare a new class, and using that to guide you on your yes/no decisions, in addition to, here are the things that I must do. And along with that time investment, I think you've got to, and again, I think Vanessa talked about this, if you are faculty of color or you've got a marginalized or minoritized identity, there is going to be hidden work. There is going to be hidden work, and you're going to have to say no at times when you will feel conflicted about it. And so it's good to understand what are my, if there are passion projects, or if there are projects where you're seeing it, these things will not necessarily contribute to my promotion and tenure, but they're things that I'm committed to doing. You're going to have to develop a rubric for yes and no. Like, what are the, and what are the flags that help me say no? You know, what are the flags that help me say no? And keep those someplace visible. Just writing them down helps stick them in your brain, but having them visible. I don't have Post-it notes, but I have documents listed. So if I say, should I be going to this meeting? And I take a look over at my list and I say, you know what? Not this meeting. No. I'll try to find someone else who goes to that. And these will change over your career, obviously, but keeping your priorities in mind as you make selections, and that includes the priorities that will advance you, as well as the priorities that sort of enrich you or give you sense of self. Sometimes they're not the same, but you can map yourself into a place where you can be both successful and authentic to yourself, authentic to your priorities. So I'll wrap and turn over to my good colleague, Dean Wentz.
Thank you, Vernon, and thank you, Vanessa, for really kicking this off in a great way. My name is Libby Wentz. I'm Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate College, and I'm also a professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. I've been at ASU for 26 years, so I've seen a lot of changes. I started here, actually I was ABD when I started. I was a brand new assistant professor when I started here. So I've been here through a lot of changes, and it's been great to see, you know, a whole bunch of new faces come into the space. I think I want to start out my remarks with kind of 4 myth busters with respect to getting funding for first generation researchers. The first one, you know, is, and it kind of relates a little bit to what Vanessa said about sort of imposter syndrome, but the myth buster that I want to introduce is like, I'll never get funding because the funding rate is so low. Only 10% of the proposals that are submitted get funding, and I'm never going to be that one. And yes, it's true that the funding rate for a lot of these federal funding agencies is quite low, but it's guaranteed that if you don't apply, you will not get funded. You increase your chances a lot by applying. And I want to have you think about it with respect to baseball. I'm not really a good baseball person, but you know, the hit rates for baseball players is also low, and they get paid a lot of money for, you know, missing the ball a lot of times. So, you know, don't go into it with a, you know, I'm never going to get funded because, you know, the funding rate's so low. The second mythbuster that I want to introduce is that only previously funded PIs will get funded. Vernon said this, that, you know, funding begets more funding. And that's true in a lot of cases, but how do you get past that? And I've got a couple ideas for you to get past that, because I'm not really busting that myth, but sort of saying there are tools to get past it. The third one that's a myth buster, and it kind of builds on something that Vanessa said, is that only those proposals with pilot studies will get funding. And that's not 100% true, but you do increase your chances of being funded if you have some kind of seed funding or some way to really develop your ideas. And the fourth myth buster is that, I need to go for that 100 million or $1 million grant, and those are the ones that really get a lot of attention. And what, again, building on, I love going last because I get to build on what other people said. But what Vanessa said is true, is that the dollar amount is not the only marker for success. For humanities and for the social sciences, which I'm in, a $10,000, $30,000 grant can really, really leverage, even a $2,000 grant can really leverage your research in a really powerful way. So it's really important to pick the right awards and not necessarily going for the NSF Career Awards, which are really important, and I encourage you to do that, but really picking the right amount. And I think Vernon said something about that. So a couple of ideas that I have to help counter those myths. First of all, many of you, if you are assistant professors, you might have startup money that you can use to start these pilot projects. Or as Vanessa said, the IHR and the Institute for Social Science Research and other places have seed funding to support, getting proposals written. So you can actually get some of this pilot research going, whether it's an in-depth literature review or actually collecting some preliminary data or testing out methodologies. There are ways that you can use seed funding to really demonstrate that your ideas can be done, because they really want to know, this is a great idea, but can the work be done? And that's what a pilot project will help you do. Another successful strategy is also to join a project as a co-PI. You don't have to always be the PI of a grant to get the kind of credit and recognition through the funding agencies that you might have. You can join a project as a co-PI to establish that record. And repeating a little bit about what was said, just to give you a kind of scale, the first external grant that I got as a PI was $45,000, which is, even in the social science, isn't a lot of money, but it was a nice project, and I got that external grant, and it was a win. And and that was like 20 some years ago. My most recent grant that was funded was $14.5 million. So again, you can have that expectation that your first grants are just small, but they can continue to grow. And I still actually really value the $45,000 to $100,000 grants, because you can be really focused and you can go get things done. The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of thinking about where you might be 1-6 a year from when you've been hired, is to also think about diversifying your sources of funding. The National Science Foundation, the NIH, those are the kind of go-to places that a lot of faculty are directed to go to, but private foundations and other sources of funding can also be a really valuable way to establish your grant record. I do want to also, again, I'm echoing what Vanessa said regarding looking at your promotion and tenure expectations. Is it something that you have to have funding for, or just demonstrate that you are participating in it? And then similarly, if it isn't an expectation, keeping your priorities in mind is really important. Personally, I think proposal writing is a lot of fun. It's where you can really get creative. You can sort of brainstorm these brand new ideas. And proposals get turned down. I was actually recently looking at my own personal hit rate, and I'm like at 30% of my proposals are funded. That means 70% of my proposals are not funded. In fact, I had one turned down about a month ago, and I was like, oh, darn. So even seasoned proposal writers get proposals turned down. But it's really important that, just like with research manuscripts, that you actually read a lot of what the panel discussion reports back on, why it was turned down, and take those into consideration and reapply. Now, it's not like the manuscript process where it's a revise and resubmit that you can say, okay, here's the ways that I've changed it, and please take these things into consideration, because it will likely be a different panel that will review the subsequent proposal. So they'll look at it as a brand new thing. So it's a little bit different in terms of the process, at least with most funding agencies. It's kind of a brand new proposal, but it does actually increase your chance of being funded. And it was a number of years ago, I heard that your chances for like the first time that you submit a proposal to NSF, it's like, at least in my area, it was like 8%, but it goes up to like almost 40% for the second time that you apply. So don't be discouraged if you get something turned down. You can take that and reapply. Another thing that's different about proposals is that, unlike a manuscript, you can't, for most of you, in manuscripts, you can submit it to one journal and you have to say, this paper is not being considered for publication in any other manuscript. You have to specify that. With proposals, you don't have to do that. You can take the same idea and shop it around to different funding agencies. Of course, you have to write it per their guidelines in terms of number of pages and the subject matters, but you can take your ideas, there isn't, and shop it around. I want to build on Faye's second question, which I don't know if the people listening to this know all of her questions, but about building social capital. It's about reaching out to people and engaging people, and that includes your potential co-PIs as well. You really want to, if it's a proposal that's going to require a team, you want to build out the right team. And of course, it's often very tempting to reach out to the people that you know and collaborate with the people that you know so that you can work really effectively with you. And that's really good. But sometimes you need the expertise of the humanist. Maybe I'd reach out to Vanessa to say, hey, I need your perspectives because I don't know this. She and I have had a couple of conversations in the past few years, which have been great and been really eye-opening. But it's an exclusive practice to just bring in the people that you already know. It's a much more inclusive practice if you reach out to people to broaden out your research agenda. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. I know that myself, it's like, okay, I'm going to reach out to so-and-so because I know that, they'll respond to me on time. But it's important to reach out to other people. I want to give an example of where I've been able to really use this, this idea of social capital. So it's been many, many years ago, I think 7 years ago, I was interested in applying for the National Science Foundation Advance Program, which is about the career advancement of women and underrepresented minorities in the STEM fields. And I had heard that a colleague who unfortunately isn't at ASU anymore, Erica Camacho, was a faculty member at the West Campus, and she was also thinking about applying for the advance grant from a perspective specifically to the West Campus. And I didn't know her at all. But I reached out to her as a cold call and said, hey, I heard you're doing this. Is there a way that we can be collaborative on this rather than competitive? And, she brought to me some really interesting perspectives that, sometimes, and she's from an underrepresented group. She felt like, her ideas, are they going to be marginalized in this project? Is she just kind of, the token Latina on the project? She was really forthcoming in terms of how she was concerned about how the team was going to take into her ideas. And they really gave me some strong sense for what we needed to do to really truly be collaborative as we were building out this proposal. The second example of taking advantage of social capital is that the university's Office of Research Advancement will help support projects, and Faye used to be a part of that team, used to support projects of a certain dollar amount and above. I think it's 5 million. Faye might be able to confirm that. Well, the NSF Advanced project was a 3 million, so it didn't meet the university's threshold for that support. But because I had had so many conversations with people in the Research Advancement Office, and I talked about how the advanced grant was so important from an institutional and transformation perspective, I was able to take advantage of some of the social capital I had built. And Faye and some of members of her team were able to step in and help with some of the logistics of writing that particular proposal, even though we technically didn't meet the threshold. Faye might want to edit that out if she was, not following her guidelines, but it was really helpful to have sort of that specific guidance. The last thing that I want to mention is about this idea of collaborative research and how you develop this research addenda. One of the things that's true is that good ideas are important, but good ideas also have to happen at the right time. There's often a timing with respect to where your ideas are. So how do you make sure you're doing things at the right time? I really like the idea of the thermostat and the thermometer. So if you think about what a thermostat does, a thermostat, you set the temperature and that then drives what the temperature is in the house or room or whatever. Whereas a thermometer is actually something that is responsive to the temperature. It says, this is what the temperature is. And what your goal is as a researcher is to be the thermostat. You want to be the person who is pushing and driving the research agenda, not the person who is just being responsive to it. Yes, we have to pay attention to what the call for proposals are, but if you're not happy with it, then I've actually gone to specifically the National Science Foundation and said, look, I think you need a call for proposals around X, because this is what's on the edge. So for example, around community resilience, I've been very forthcoming that it's an important part of the research agenda. So I love that thermostat thermometer analogy, and I hope that's helpful to you as you think about how you were describing your research ideas, and as you give your elevator pitch, being able to seek it. I'm going to circle back to something that I said in the beginning. I'm a huge fan of seed grant funding. IHR, Vanessa mentioned. There's also the Institute for Social Science Research, which does seed grant funding. Many of the colleges and departments will provide some seed grant funding. It really allows you to test out your ideas and to kind of build out the methods. I think the most common things that I have seen in my reviewer comments is that there's not enough detail in terms of what it is that you're trying to do. Because you kind of gloss over that. You're like, well, I'll figure it out as I come to it. Sometimes it's the theoretical foundations are not solid. I never agree with that one. I think my theoretical foundations are just fine. But I do agree that a lot of times the exact methods, they want to know exactly what you're doing. And you're like, but I might change it. As this kind of last question says, does it change after the award? And the answer is, yeah, sometimes it does. But when you get funded, they want to know that when you get that, when that money lands in your desk, you're going to start doing something. And so being as specific as possible, it's super hard sometimes because you're like, yeah, I kind of know what I want to do. But it's super hard to be, it's super important for you to be specific. So anyway, those are my comments, and I hope that they are helpful to all of you. And thanks for joining.
So I wanted to thank you, panelists. That was brought a tear to my eye. It was exactly what we needed right now. So I appreciate your perspective, your passion, and your commitment to ASU and sharing that with us today. I wanted to take a quick note that those who are first generation at ASU, in any kind of context, we purposely didn't define it, so you could define yourself. You do have resources on campus, and this was really experiential based discussion. One of those resources, though, is Kaushik. And Kaushik, can you take a minute and introduce yourself?
Surely. Thank you, Faye. So my name is Kaushik Balakrishnan. I am the inaugural director. I shouldn't say inaugural anymore. I've been here 2 years. Director for Research Development and Advancement for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Dr. Wentz used to be dean in our college at one time. And so what the resources that Faye is talking about is we are now starting, we actually are in the second writing cohort for social sciences faculty to help them go through the exact problems you all discussed today in terms of how to find funding, what are some of the myth busting activities. I really loved it, Dr. Vance, because I think there are a whole bunch of myths that really stand no merit. And I think we should be busting them all the time. And so we are working with 10 faculty that were nominated by the chairs and directors. But that's just one aspect of just getting them in the early career discussion to get them to get excited about their research impact. And we told them there is no dollar amount that is small, there is no dollar amount that is big. It's about your project and what impact you want to make. And with that note, I think central support is always constrained, so they have to put dollar amounts on what they work on. But at the college level, we actually do support proposal development activities now for without any dollar amounts. We just want to see what we can do for you and where we can meet you. So if you have a project description or a strategy discussion that you need to do on a proposal, we're happy to come in and do so in a very expedient manner and just walk away from it. And we are also happy to review any draft that you put out and give you reviewer feedback, just as you would get from a sponsor, for example. So we are happy to do those things. And the only thing is you just need to reach out to us and we can do so. My email is kb12@asu.edu. It's easy, kb12@asu.edu. So you can reach out if there are any things within our college, especially if we have faculty who are going. We can't do it for the entire ASU, unfortunately, but definitely for faculty who are lead financial unit within the college, we definitely are able to offer that service. Thanks, Faye.
Thank you, Kaushik. And so now I'm going to stop the recording to field any questions, if that's okay.
I have another